grotesquely violated skeletons discovered recently in Ireland have thrown new light onto our ever-growing obsession with vampires and our fear of the undead.
This burial was very obviously treated in a violent and aggressive fashion.
This is probably the most extraordinary deviant burial I've ever seen. I think the message is still the same. It's a very determined attempt to keep this person down.
Archaeologists are now investigating why these bodies were subjected to such violence. The answer may lie in horrors that have haunted us for centuries.
Milo, 25 years old, also showing signs of the condition of vampirism mentioned.
There was this intense fear of vampires and revenants, people coming back from the dead and haunting the living.
They were basically corrupting corpses that had kind of escaped from their graves and wandered about.
The Irish skeletons can help us understand our ancient terror of the undead and even where it comes from. To explain these shocking burials, archaeologists must unlock clues from mysterious medieval texts and harness modern forensic technology. The story will even take us to a terrifying 21st century case in Romania. The mountains and lakes of Western Ireland have long been seen as a land of mystery, haunted by fairies and magic. In 2004, archaeologists began an excavation in a little-known area called Kilteashen that would open a window onto our darkest fears. They were searching for a medieval bishop's palace dating from the 12th century. Chris Reed is one of the directors of the project.
When we started excavating, we were hoping or anticipating that this was possibly the location of this bishop's palace, and we couldn't have been more wrong.
They began to excavate underneath the flagstones of a ruined building near the lost palace.
When we lifted up the stones themselves in here, we literally had faces looking back at us, which had been crushed flat by the floor, indicating that whoever built this building at whatever time period knew that they were building directly on top of human remains, which is quite a dark and gloomy kind of thing to do. Within this quite small area, literally about 3 meters by 3 meters, we excavated somewhere between 30 and 40 skeletons, literally stacked one on top of another in quite shallow graves.
This was just one of a series of remarkable discoveries. The team made more cuttings into a raised burial platform in the field. Each was filled with bodies.
Based upon where these cuttings are actually located, the density of burials and their depth, and if we sort of assume that all the areas in between are similarly filled with burials, we're probably looking at a total burial population of between 2,500 and 3,000 people, which makes it a very, very, very substantial cemetery.
Late one morning, Chris was called over to see a new skeleton emerging from the earth.
This skeleton in particular was clearly treated in a very violent and aggressive fashion. Visually, it's quite striking, particularly the legs, the way they've been twisted and bent back up around the stone. It's really disturbing, and it's also shocking as well, but it also makes it very interesting.
It seems that this large boulder was deliberately placed in the grave to deform the skeleton. Professor Mark Horton has excavated hundreds of medieval burials, and he is astonished by the find.
I've never seen anything so extraordinary. You could actually do this naturally. It's as if this person has been broken into many bits and they're bound together into a great bundle of flesh. The spinal column would have come round here, round underneath the chest, back round, and then the pelvis must have been here. It's almost as if they'd broken the body up, bound it in such a way that it couldn't possibly ever come back to life again. In my entire archaeological career, I've never ever seen anything quite like it.
As they dug further down into the layers of burials, there were more remarkable finds.
On archaeological sites, the best part of the excavation is when somebody shouts out loud, "I found something," you know, everybody come look. And as the skeleton was being uncovered, it was very, very clear that, yeah, there was this large stone stuck in the mouth. Visually, it's a very dramatic sort of image.
None of the team had ever found anything like it before. But then there was another discovery.
You always expect to find something unexpected on an excavation, but then when we found a second one, and in the exact same area, we knew we had something that was special.
But why were these bodies treated with such violence after they were already dead? The archaeologists removed the 3 skeletons from the site, along with more than 100 other burials. They took them back to the lab for further analysis. As the skeletons were cleaned, shocking evidence emerged about the deaths of some of those buried in the cemetery.
Chris, do you think these look like cut marks?
Yeah, definitely. Now that's a big chop mark, and then a smaller one parallel to it. Very, very straight edge.
The cut marks suggest that some of the Kiltetian bodies were killed by bladed weapons, like swords or spears.
In that time in Ireland, you have multiple different kingships in the region. Each of them is vying for authority. Warfare is almost an endemic part of society in these periods, and the role of warriors comes through very strongly when we look at the literature and the evidence that survives. People were aware of the constant fear and aggression that could be part of their lives.
Even in this violent age, the mutilation of these bodies was extraordinary. Were the people who buried them afraid of what they might become? Archaeologists in Ireland have uncovered disturbing burials which seem to have been treated with extreme violence. One has had its legs twisted as if undergoing torture. Others were found with large stones rammed into their jaws. But these strange burials are not the only ones that have been found. They have been discovered all over Western Europe. Skeletons weighed down with large boulders were excavated in the Czech Republic in the 1960s. Bizarre burials have also been found in England.
And for a medieval burial in Southwell were found nails, not these actual ones, but very similar ones, that had been deliberately placed in the body. So one was found through the right shoulder, another one was in through the heart, and another one through the left ankle. It's almost as if they deliberately placed them there to make sure that the body could never rise up again. A number of burials have been excavated of people who have either had their heads cut off or been placed face down or had the legs tied or been mutilated in various other ways. There's even one that's got a spear thrust through it.
Archaeologists and historians are beginning to believe that there may be a very particular reason for these disturbing medieval burials.
I think the general explanation for this has to be that these are people who are seen as a threat. They're going to go on walking around after they've died. They're going to come out of their graves, and the living have to keep them down.
Could this explain the extraordinary Kiltetian skeletons with the rocks in their mouths? Were they treated as people who might return from the dead? Dr. Katrina Mackenzie is an osteoarchaeologist specializing in bone analysis. She will examine the skeletons for any clues that could explain why they were buried so violently.
The thing that interests me most is that when you look at the skeleton, you're looking at an actual human being who lived and died long ago, and you're looking almost directly into the past. It's always really exciting when there is something unusual about the skeleton or about the burial position, because you just can't help but wonder what it was that happened in this person's life that meant that they were buried in a different manner.
Katrina has reassembled one of the skeletons with the stone found in its jaws.
This individual is a male individual. It's a young adult, which is probably between 30 to 35 years of age.
These bare bones can give us a glimpse of what this man might have been like.
He was quite a muscular individual. He's got quite prominent muscle markings on his skeleton, which shows that he was quite physically active during his life.
But it is the stone that intrigues her.
This is the stone which was forced into the jaws of burial 102. As you can see, it's quite large and it's quite heavy as well. It's triangular in shape. Yeah, I've not seen anything quite like this before in my own experience.
Could the skull itself reveal any further clues about why the body was treated so violently? When it was recovered from the earth, it was already in an extremely fragile state. As the team cleaned and prepared it for analysis, they began to realize the extent of the damage.
Do you think there's any chance of the skull actually being pieced back together?
I don't think it's going to be possible for us to reconstruct it more than I already have. The facial bones were very crushed when they were in the ground, and so I literally have hundreds of tiny fragments of mostly facial bones, which it would be near impossible to piece it all back together.
The past is not going to unlock its secrets easily for the Kiltetian archaeologists. Centuries of farming on the land may well have damaged the skull, but even graveyards that haven't been farmed or built on can yield skeletons in strange positions. At Barclay in Gloucestershire, another cemetery is under excavation. Project leader Professor Mark Horton knows how easily bodies can shift from the position in which they were buried.
This is a fairly normal early medieval burial. You can see the bones are in the ground, the arm bone, the skull and so forth. We've just found it, we're cleaning it up at the moment. But how a body reaches this position is quite a complicated process. Some bodies literally blow up underground as the gases are generated and it's in a confined space. And, you know, there's stories of people walking around churchyards and you hear them going pop, pop, as these bodies are exploding. Bones can go everywhere, if you like. In fact, here you can see probably the skull wasn't laid in that position, but might have fallen over into that position. So when people discover bodies in the ground, they can be in all sorts of extraordinary positions. They're not necessarily how they've been laid down.
So could this explain the strange burials at Kiltetian? Could the stones in the jaws somehow have slipped in there by accident as the result of violent contortions during decomposition? Chris Reed is convinced this is not the explanation.
It was very obviously intentional. This is not a stone which rolled into the mouth after the burial process had been completed or through later disturbance. It could only have gotten there if it was put in quite forcefully.
The burials with the stones in the mouth are very interesting because they're large boulders and they look like they've been pushed in with some force into the dead body. And it suggests that they're trying to block the mouth. And that could be to stop a soul, having left the dead body, from re-entering into it and reanimating that body so it could rise from the dead.